Hello, good morning, everyone. Just want to request the panelists to come and take their seats.
Go on. Would you? Watch that. Oh, then you see it slow. I said, yeah. I know one question. Yeah, but I didn't. They isolated you. Giving them one video if you heard. It's a after.
We can begin now, right?
Okay, so good morning, everyone. So the morning session is on sensorial economy and bodily health, and there are three participants in it. Prasun will be presenting physically only, and the rest two participants will join online. So the first presenter, as it has been enlisted, Dr. Prasun Chatterjee. He will be speaking on the body and bodily practices in Alterity, descriptions of health practices, cures, and magic in European travel narratives in 17th century South Asia. Um, Before I begin, let me share that I and Prasoon, both of us, share some sort of bonding because of our common teacher, who is no more Dr. Bisumay. He was my supervisor. He taught Prasoon also. So we share a close affectionate bond since yesteryear. So I invite Prasoon to please begin his presentation. Then we can, so 20-25 minutes will be the presentation, and then we can engage with the topic.
Thank you, Saurav. Dr. Pati had a very interesting effect on us about research, I think. It remains with us whatever we do in our professional lives, and that's the bonding we share. So I'll I'll be brief. I don't have a long presentation, not many things to say. And can we have the presentation here, please? So it's a slightly tweaked title. I thought I had become too narrow with the title that I gave at that time. So this is how I would like to express what I have to say right now. So let's look at the European travelers of the 17th century. Can we go on to the next slide, please? Oh, sorry. Point here. Oh, right.
That corner.
Okay.
It's on. What? Now, please change.
Yeah, it's on.
Is it?
It's on.
Looks at the road.
Yeah, not too many slides, so I'll keep on briefing you and you could turn the slide. Yeah. Sorry, my slides are a bit heavy, but I thought I'll put down everything. So essentially, when we look at the 17th century healthcare practices about European travelers in the subcontinent, Um, Two contributions seem to be interesting. Now, in 1995, M.N. Pearson wrote this article in Mass, and uh, most of the descriptions that are there in the travel narratives, he brought them in very well over there. But that is the 90s, and it suffers from certain problems. In my view, I have noted just one. In the most general sense, what Bernier and um, other others represent is the beginning of the process by which Europe achieved mastery over Asia. So this is a statement from Pearson. So we have a body of work, an initial body of work, but there are these aspects of perception which I think today we need to revise and look at anew. And from what I'll try to say is exactly what Professor Geltner indicated in the first session, inaugural session, and some of the other panelists and professors here have suggested. So, keeping aside the anxieties of yoking everything to modern capitalism, um, taking our space away from there and looking at certain things within themselves in a certain way, not forgetting the broader currents, the main grand narratives, but finding a space within that to look at our sources closely. So the other work, Sanjay Subramaniam's work, where he actually gets into exploring Manucci, who is otherwise sort of castigated as a pretender, as a teller of tales, anecdotal information, which has, which cannot lead to verifiable history, and produces a really layered narrative. Um, but his focus is on an individual, and also the other focus is of a grand narrative of connected history. So we are, in a certain way, from the little that I'll talk about here, we are moving away from that, and consciously. Um, so and that is actually the point, the third point here. We have a very recent work by Nandini Das, which has been appreciated a lot. It's called Quoting India. You will see in the subtitle, it has Origins of the Empire. So we are always very, looking at, the sources. We are always very aware of the coming of industrial England, its effects everywhere, and then industrial Europe, its effects everywhere. Enlightenment hasn't happened as yet in the 17th century years. And um, also, empires of England, how they develop, and how the Mughal Empire kind of is in conjunction with that or not. These are the major, and the Safavids and the Ottomans. So we start thinking about those connections, but taking our time away from that, I would like to look at, sorry, let's go back to that. Yeah. So I would like to look at the century itself in the subcontinent at certain sites, in transition, in relief on its own. Some of the effects come from other places in other ways, but something happens here on the site itself. And there I draw inspiration from the concept of alterity, because when I started working on travel narratives in the early 2000s, Cambridge History of Travel and others, for I wrote an article in 2005 on alcohol in pre-colonial India. Alterity was a major molding vehicle for us. But so but then there are problems with the alterity model. um, you start thinking of Eliade, and you start thinking of Levinas, and you start thinking of the transcendental. So I would like to qualify saying that I am looking for that space where we don't think about the transcendental, but we think about the magical. Or taking on from a new new historicism of Greenblatt and Gallagher, we think about tales and wonders, something which resonates with Digby as well, whom we are publishing now. So in that space, where we are not going out to hunt for physical and tangible connections, and there are, in the space of alterity, there are these fuzzy boundaries which actually dissolve the self and the other. So the other is not only the breaking down of the self, but there are interpenetrations happening, like Professor Deepak Kumar mentioned the other day in his year. So looking at that space, let's now go on to the next slide, please. So there, I find that in the narratives that have been created earlier, and I'm now looking at the 17th century as a sweep, there would be gaps, but I want to indicate a certain point here. People have paid very little attention to the early, the first batch of explorers of the 17th century, late 16th, early 17th century, especially from England, who were arriving here. And there, if we look at the sources closely, we find certain things. And we can think of certain transitions from there. So Professor Ishrat Alam had asked that question, and that's something which I had thought about, and it's very interesting. What did they do in the ships while they arrived? So actually, when we go through Lancaster, Jordan, Downtown, or Hawkins, or many others, Finch, a major part of their narrative is about arriving at Surat or Cambay or these places. And there, um, they are focusing on the journey itself. The journey is very hard, and they are adapting to it. They are still not, they have not adapted to it. And the East India Company officials, the captains of the ships, they draw up these 17 or 18 points, exact instructions to the sailors as to what to do so that they don't suffer scurvy or plague or many of the other things that they need to keep in mind. So that 18 or 19 point minute actually corresponds from ship to ship and from voyage to voyage, which is an interesting study in itself. But also, once after this tortuous journey, when they land at the seaports of mainly Surat, but also Broach or Cambay, these places, then waiting outside to get their passes, and then getting into the seaport. But then when they travel inside towards Agra, there are different cities where Burhanpur, several others, where they have to stop. They can't get into the cities. So parts of the description there are about getting the passes from the governor over there, but there are also officials arrive who say that you are being kept here only because we want to keep other pillagers out of the city, so we will bring you inside after that. So, and this is something for I haven't charted it out as yet, but I think there is an interesting point, because there is perhaps purity pollution working there. There is keeping outside the city foreigners who have come, and we don't know health and sanity and practices of that kind, so let's keep them, watch them, and then sort of get them into the city. But I haven't found any direct references to that as yet. I mean, that this is something, while working on this paper, it kind of came to me that there could be an angle of that kind. So what we see is that this journey to the Mughal capital, and the Mughal capital could shift. It could be in Agra, it could be in Lahore. They follow the tents, and that Getting to that was quite difficult for them. Adaptability was very low. Can we go on to the next slide, please? So this, I say, is death around the corner, because I'll just read this bit out to emphasize on certain points. Some 12 persons who kept company with the general until he came to Bramport or Burhanpur, about 15 days journey from Surat, where Captain Sharkey fell sick, and then they all left him, saving the surgeon. I should have highlighted that, and another, every one following his own course as long as the money lasted. So that the preacher and many others died at Bramport. So it's a very sort of passing reference, but one can see how low mortality was once they reached here and near thereabout. Mr. Revet, Gabriel Brook, and as many as stayed with him at Data died. But it pleased God that Captain Sharpe recovered and went to Agra. So these, and this is John Jordan, but these kind of descriptions abound once you come on land. So this is, I'm talking about the first 2 decades of the 17th century. But then let's go on to the next slide, please. Um, so, so this inability to cope is not, in these early decades, not a comment on the city or on public health, or as far as I understand, because, and I picked this quote up, and I am interested, I should have told you, in the fragmentary and the marginal, which don't fall into the main narrative. So that's why my interest here. Here I fell sick of a flix and fever, but having ended on our business, I let not to travel. Many of the ascensions was the ship in which they came. Men died in this town. We lay as secure in the camp as if we had been in our own houses. I never saw better government than there was in the camp, and plenty of all things. And you would see that this changes by the second half of the 17th century. So something's happening here. So again, Jordan, but again, this you can find in all the other early narratives, diaries, and so also I put these quotes up to indicate that things are said in a very matter of fact way. The tonality of that has to be caught. It's a diary. Nothing is being sort of theatrically represented in that manner. So. There's a difference which we will come to. So these were the first decades of the century. Can we go on to the next slide, please? Um, Later in the century, and there's this middle period, which I would say that I have not yet sort of explored well. So there's a gap here in my presentation, but later in the century, which is something again I studied well during my research for my PhD thesis, we see assured tones. The language of the travelers themselves become assured, judgmental, but should we call it a move towards hegemony, hierarchy, imperial, coming of the imperial? I would not agree with that, because I mean we have to understand this middle space. Otherwise, we fall into the teleology of what is happening in the 18th century. So, looking at the 17th century on its own is very important for me. So individual travelers are now, in relief. It's not the groups of people that Jordan was talking about earlier. So Fryer, John Fryer, Bernier, Francois Bernier, these were actually physicians. So a lot of credibility has been given to their narratives in the historiography that has been. but there were also wanderers and pretenders like Manucci, and also friars like Abbe Carré. So there were, and they didn't travel in groups. They are expressing themselves differently. So this is something, this shift, uh, I don't find it any of the history writings of the 17th century as yet. This shift of um, uh, from a group inability to cope to becoming more confident in alterity. How did this happen? That's still, that coping mechanism, we can only indicate towards that in certain ways, but the descriptions become more subjective, according to me. They become more personal, judgmental, engaged. I know what is happening, and I can sort of control it to in my environment in that manner, that sort of a thing. And this adaptation needs to be seen, like I have said, not just in terms of self-preservation anymore, but by the 1670s, 80s, 90s, an integration to adapt. We have, sketches of these times. Manucci sent a whole lot, which did not get published for a long time. uh, so there's a story about that I'll come to in a bit, but this is also about clothes, food, um, other kinds of aspects of daily life, which now seem to these individuals that they had adapted. They stayed for 10 years, 15 years, Manucci for 50 years, grew up here. So it's, and no description as such of very serious medical condition. So something is happening also in terms of the ability to interact with the diseases and the environment in that manner. So increasingly comparisons of Indian cities with Europe, we don't find it much before Thomas Rowe. Thomas Rowe, 1620s, is definitely a shift. He observes the physicians here. That's a point I have not put in that manner. But I think that is something to capture within the currents of the 17th century itself, because the latest work on Thomas Rowe is quoting India, where the origins of the empire, of the English empire, it collapses into that sort of an inquiry, whereas we need to perhaps look at Rowe and that shift on its own, where he says he interviews physicians here, gets to know about the system, and later travelers are describing their processes very well. So increasingly, the European travelers are becoming judgmental about Western knowledge and medicine, and I wouldn't say that everything is because of what is happening in Europe, but something happens here. People become more sort of relaxed and more confident about what they're saying, and that shows in the language of the narratives themselves. So if we go on to and Pearson notices, that's an interesting thing in his 95 article. He notices that Bernier makes these comparative statements for the first time about European medicine and its superiority over Indian healing practices, quite confidently, quite clearly. So that clarity is not there before this. It's a fuzzy and a space which is getting molded. So, but he obviously links this to what is happening in England at that time and the rest of Europe slowly. But I would think Bernier comes from a very different context, where he, in his account, um, gives a lot of importance to land, who is the landowner, how is land revenue extracted. So he comes from the French monarchy of a very different kind from what the English were. So let's go on to the next slide, please. So there's this space which cannot be collapsed into this or that. So when we look at all the anecdotal information of Manucci and all the pretense and all the unreliable things he says, but this is something which has been quoted everywhere. The other quotes I have put up, they are not quoted in many places, they are fragmentary, but this has been central to a lot of dialogue between whether Manucci actually saw rhinoplasty, whether he described it well or not. So a positivist debate between health practitioners from 2010s we see has developed, and historians have also, some historians have responded to it. But whether it led to learning directly or not, the awareness that there was still to learn is to be seen in a character like Manucci, who does not exactly fall into the bracket of a European in that sense, because he comes here at the age of 14 or 15, and he's there till his death for 52 years or so. And but at the same time, this description of surgery of the nose and some others about fingers, reconstitution of limb, they do not reach the European audience in that manner, because uh, Manucci sends this, and William Irwin, the translator and one who got this together, observes this well, sort of. Um, um, sort of comments on this, that the descriptions went to a priest in Vienna, sorry, not in Vienna, but in um, sorry, the Italian city at that time, Venice. Yeah. So at Venice, this reaches the friar Catro, and he does not let this get published. The 3 volumes of Manucci, he makes an abridgment of that, which is called the Pepys, which becomes popular in Europe at that time. This description is not there. And later in 1760s, Madras Gazette, and later in London, people start talking about these practices in the subcontinent. So, um, so the scope of learning still there. Let's go on to the next slide, please. Yeah, wrapping up. So this is my last slide. And there are other instances, but I picked this up. There are other more tangible instances, but in folk medicine, indigenous medicine, and and uh, this thing about demons, and yeah, which we can call a sort of uh, a common meeting point between magic and health practices, is something where Manucci as a pretender starts manifesting that. And all the other European travelers are not like that. But at this time, as I said, every traveler is an individual, sort of with characteristics of their own. So not only was I famed as a doctor, so he bandies about of his own self, but he also is someone who says that I pretend, I don't know. And at one point of time, to a woman, he prescribes the remedy of love and getting married as a medicine for stomachache. So that's the character that Manucci is. But if we pay attention to this statement, he says that, but it was rumored that I possessed the power of expelling demons from the bodies of the possessed. So, so this thing about the magical, about people who are near you and yet they are foreign in certain manner, and how the local communities are looking at someone like Manucci is very interesting. So there's this scope of looking at Western medicine as well as the magical and the demonical from the same, but we can't collapse it into an understanding of racism, of the plantation economy as we see in the 18th century. So I'll leave you with that thought, and thank you for listening.
Move on to other presenter, or firstly the question answer? Thank you, Prasun. So we move on to the other presenter, Rose Byfleet. She's a PhD candidate at Monash University in Australia, and she will be speaking on perfume as prophylactic medicine in 16th century Italy. So, is she there?
Yes. It's fine.
Okay. So, Rose, you can begin your presentation.
Great, can you hear me and can you see the screen? Great, okay. Thank you very much for having me here today. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the people of the Kulin Nations on whose land, which was never ceded, Monash stands, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And today I'm going to be adding an Italian aspect to this discussion of preventative healthcare practices in the pre-industrial world. And I'm going to start by saying that in early modern courts, air was not neutral. It was managed, scented and medicated. The use of fragrance is well known in Safavid Iran, at the Eurasian Ottoman court, and the Mughal court in India, of course. This paper explores the use of perfume at the Grand Ducal Medici court in 16th century Florence as a form of prophylactic medicine, and it seeks to situate it within a larger, interconnected early modern world where fragrance was both a sensory and a medical imperative. I propose that the shared use of fragrance as a tool for managing the air and consequently health points to a broader trans-regional medical logic grounded in an olfactory awareness that goes beyond concepts of civility, which is normally how perfume is discussed, certainly in Europe in this period. Fragrance functioned within a Hippocratic Galenic framework to regulate air and emotion, two of the 6 non-natural things crucial to maintaining health that we've heard a lot about in the last 2 days, so I won't be going into any detail on that. And through an analysis of contemporary perfume recipes and health regimens, I argue that scent was both materially and symbolically embedded in the logic of elite health management at the Medici court. So just for some context, the Medici dukes and Grand Dukes ruled Tuscany throughout the 16th and 17th centuries, and the first 3 Grand Dukes, Cosimo I, Francesco, and then Ferdinando, roughly coincided with the reign of the great Mughal emperor Akbar. Their cultural impact, particularly in the visual arts, was deliberately cultivated as a form of power by the dynasty and has been the primary focus of historians until recently. Elements of the visual and material culture of the Medici court can be found in museums and private collections around the world, yet fragrance is ephemeral, so the olfactory culture can only be approached through a reconstruction of contemporary attitudes through objects and from archival documents such as letters and recipe collections. Today, rather than trying to find direct connections between the 2 courts in terms of exchange, which others have done, particularly for their material cultures, the commonalities that I will be discussing here are primarily in the sense that would have perfumed the respective environments, for instance, rose, sandalwood, musk. The importance of air management is, especially when dealing with heat, is another area I think they have in common, and the envisaging of the human body as a humoral entity is fundamental to this. The air was one of the environmental factors influencing internal humoral balance, and as well as being necessary for life and health, it was a key vector of disease. The 15th century Italian philosopher and physician Marsilio Ficino pinpoints the humid density of the air characterized by its unpleasant smell as the catalyst for sickness. He says, humidity is the mother of putrefaction. A similar understanding of the air appears in the autobiography of the fourth Mughal emperor Jahangir, apologies for my pronunciation. He notes that those who inhale bad air were weak-hearted, feeble-minded, and suffered from illness. Perfume formed a crucial response in both traditions. Fragrance was thought to cleanse, rectify, and balance the air, particularly during plague outbreaks or in Italy during seasonal transitions, an attitude articulated by the 11th century Arab physician Ibn al-Battar, who describes the ability of fragrance to purify polluted or pestilential air. Both systems originated in Greco-Arabic thought and thus broadly share categorization of fragrant materials. And here I'm just going to shout out to Neha Vermani, who is on the group as well, because I've been relying on her research into taste and culture at the Mughal court for a lot of the background information on perfume there. So she says that in the Islamic tradition, odor intensity was used as the criteria to categorize substances into primary and secondary aromatics, which were also classified according to their inherent hot, cold, and temperate qualities. And so in this tradition, primary fragrances would be musk, ambergris, aloes wood, camphor, and saffron. And secondary would be things like clove, pepper, cinnamon, mace, nutmeg, etc. Now, in the Italian tradition too, simples were classified by humoral type, so they were also hot, cold, wet, or dry, and their intensity was measured by degree from the first to the third degree, with the first degree being mild and the third, fourth degree, in fact, being very hot. Although broadly similar, there are some disparities between the traditions when aromatic ingredients are compared closely. For instance, although musk, ambergris, ginger, and black pepper are both hot in each formulation, watermelon and citron are cold in the Italian tradition and hot in Mughal texts. And in the Italian tradition, melons are can be quite dangerous for health because they're considered so cold that they could put the fire of the stomach out. Likewise, rose and floral scents more generally are cold in Galenic thought rather than temperate as in Islamic tradition. But both systems use this knowledge to work with the principles of contraries to achieve humoral balance as a form of preventative medicine. Oops, gone through too many slides, hold on. So perfume recipes from 16th century Italian collections reflect a sophisticated attention to climate, temperament, and mood. They reveal that rather than the use of strong smells to cover poor hygiene, which is often the assumption, fragrance was used to calibrate the properties of the air according to humoral need. For instance, the cooling qualities of rosewater, along with other flower waters such as myrtle or orange blossom, was used during the summer to counter excessive heat. Rose vinegar, which was both cooling and drying, was a widespread form of prophylaxis against the plague, not because it countered the plague directly, but because its humoral properties would help bring the air back into balance. Perfumes were adjusted for season and health concern, revealing a precise calibration of scent to health. Summer fragrances, usually vinegars and waters, were sprinkled around rooms or used to fill up huge decorative dishes called rinfrescatoio, which in the word implies coolness and freshness. And they're often assumed to be wine coolers. And you can see on the slide here, this dish is, imagine a very large salad bowl, sort of like this big. And I think they would have filled these with these scented waters, and you would allow the breeze to move across them, or the scent would be released as the water simply evaporated. And on the right-hand side, you've got a drawing of several different perfume sprinklers and one amazing perfume sprinkler that actually survives. Both of those are in the Met in New York. The scent of rosewater, sedge vinegar, or orange blossom would humorally cool the air, bringing it into a more balanced and therefore healthful state. And on the same basis, we have listed in one inventory a black sandalwood fan decorated with flowers in various colours, and which connects form with function, because in the Greco-Arabic tradition, sandalwood, imported to Italy from India, was cooling in the third order and drying in the second order. So this object, which was very likely of Indian manufacture, would cool and dry the air both physically and humorally as it was fanned in front of the face. And the decorative flowers on it provided a visual illusion to its sweet smell and contributed to the pleasing of the spirits, which is another important factor in maintaining health. In contrast, night air, especially in the winter, tended towards the cold and damp. And a recipe to perfume the winter bed things is composed of warm, dry ingredients, including benzoin, storax, clove, cinnamon, lavender, cedar bark, and rosemary. These are all scents that would counter this double danger. A different perfume for the bed, which is essentially an incense, is a simple combination of storax, benzoin, frankincense, and juniper wood, to which is added clove, nutmeg, and orange flower water to make a paste, which is then bound with gum tragacanth and willow carbon to make it flammable. The overall humoral profile of this combination is very warm and dry. And when burnt, it would further compound these properties, and therefore it was ideal for bringing the night air into balance. So the climate in Florence, despite popular opinion, is actually very humid. It's always been a very humid city, and that's why the Romans built down in Florence and the Etruscans, a much more ancient civilization, built on the hills nearby. Burning perfumes was a crucial part of rectifying the air to manage this potential danger. The logic of the cure of contraries can be seen across all of these recipes for perfumes to burn, because they're comprised almost exclusively of hot, dry ingredients and formed into pastils or other shapes to be burned as incense. And we have a record of this from 1 October in the mid-16th century, when storax, to make the pastils to perfume the room, like those which are usually sent, was requested. Now, storax is hot and dry. Mid-October is likely to have been very damp. Recurring phlegmatic sicknesses would have been exacerbated by the conditions of the 14th century palace the Medici are living in at this point, which you can see on the right-hand side on a clear day, but in the midwinter it's rather grey and cloudy and often foggy. So burning a hot, dry fragrance in a perfume burner similar to the one depicted as well, along with lighting a fire in the morning, which was another of Marsilio Ficino's recommendations, would have helped to heat and dry the air out. Now, one point to note is that actually very few perfume burners survive from this period. Those which do survive have often been modified into something else, like an inkstand or a candelabra. And there's also not many listed in contemporary inventories. And at first, this might suggest that perfume is actually perhaps not such an important part of life as it might be in the Ottoman court or in the Mughal court. However, upon reading recipes for making perfumes, it becomes evident that a wide variety of receptacles were used, because there were frequent references to simply some sort of dish, for waters especially, or the assumption that a perfume as an incense can simply be burnt, which is the same as when you get incense cones today. It just needs to be put on a non-flammable surface. And this also points, I think, to the quotidian nature of the use of perfumes in this period. They're not something elaborate. They are just such a regular part of health management that you don't need something ornate to contain them. One element which sometimes is a little more elaborate is perfumed waters to drink. So in contemporary Italian understanding, odour was made up of particles of matter that were physically absorbed by the body, which made it a potent curative medicine as well. So, for example, cold, dry sandalwood mixed with cold, damp rosewater was recommended for the treatment of headaches caused by heat. And a similarly curative use of scent is also evident in the 12th century Persian poet Nizami's description of the scent of lemons removing the torture from a friend's brain. The application of fragrance brought both the body and its environment back into balance. And a literal example of this is the consumption of perfumed waters, which has direct parallels with Mughal court practices. The 17th century Midsnama, a conduct book, apologies for mangling the pronunciation here, describes the curation of perfumed dining spaces as an essential feature of gentlemanliness. This is Neha's work, so please go and read her fantastic article. Foods were scented with saffron, ambergris, rosewater, and musk, and the manual gives clear instructions on the importance of pleasing all the senses at a party, emphasizing the significance of scent. Now, the consumption of perfumed waters was similarly an elite practice at the Medici court, although with a very different function. Waters to drink were fragranced with ambergris, musk, rose, cinnamon, citrus peel, clove, or lavender. These perfumes relate to a very medicinal understanding of scent. Breath reflected the internal state of the body, and bad breath indicated an imbalance or even internal putrefaction. It could indicate illness, undigested food, rotting teeth or gums, and given the proximity of the mouth to the brain, there was a particular need to look after the brain, to protect the brain from this potential threat. The recipe for one such water specifically assures the reader it tastes good, perhaps because this was not a certainty, indicating that it was the scent, rather than its taste, that was the active agent of healthcare. The consumption of perfumes in this manner indicates that, as decadent as it might sound, the practice was firmly rooted in medicine. And on the slide here, you can see an example of one of these perfumed waters to drink. But the right-hand side is a vase called made of a clay called bucaro, and this starts to be imported from the Americas in the 16th and 17th centuries and becomes very fashionable amongst the Spanish and Italian courts, because when you put water into these clay vessels, it perfumes it. And this had a whole other range of medicinal properties, which I'm not going to go into today. To conclude, although my focus today has been on Florence, the use of perfume as prophylaxis was not limited to Italy. Descriptions of scent, the importance of perfumes in relation to food, and the significance particularly of rosewater, incense, and attars, as described in contemporary texts, suggest that at both the Medici and the Mughal court, scented air held an abundance of political, social, and medical significance. Perfume was a serious technology of health operating within established medical theories and elite political environments. It was a means of regulating the environment and emotion. In this way, it helped manage an individual's health and the effective atmosphere of court life, which itself was a crucial component of political stability. This medical emotional use of scent challenges modern assumptions that the historic use of perfumes was ornamental, decadent, or simply used to disguise unpleasant smells. Instead, it was a vital part of health management, deeply connected to the body's porous relationship with the environment, and parallels can be found in courts across the early modern world. Thank you.
So thanks a lot, Rose. We will come back to you. The next paper presenter is Dr. Amrita Chattopadhyay. She is postdoctoral research fellow at LZMO Berlin. She will be speaking on perfumes and illuminants, embodied material practices of sensory objects in the Mughal Empire. So we just listened to the paper which dealt with 16th century Italy and perfumes. So now it will be on the Mughal India. So Amrita, please, if you are here, you can begin your presentation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rai. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. I'll put it in the slideshow mode so that yeah. Thank you so much, Professor Hassan, Professor Getna, and Dr. Ahmed for giving me this opportunity to present in front of all the distinguished scholars who, like, on the basis of whose work I've learned and evolved. And also, I'm extremely humbled and excited to be presenting in front of my externals who have also examined my thesis, Professor Alam and Professor Rezavi, respectively, my MPhil and PhD thesis. So it's almost kind of coming home for me in that sense. So for this presentation, I have I'm focusing on two objects, two sensory objects. One is the illuminants, and the second is the perfumes. Interestingly, as Rose's presentation goes, so we have to kind of bring in new methods to do sensory history. And I am relying on David Hovis's work on senses and how the sensory hierarchy that Alan Corbin also kind of points out is based on the entire sensory history is based on this sensory hierarchy where visual is given the topmost, the strongest senses, and smell is the weakest senses in the as the hierarchy is panned out. Bringing together the two senses, one from the strongest and the weakest, and I want to see how the entire bodily health and ephemeral material practices are interrelated on the body of the consumer, and also focusing on the craft-based production knowledge that has been textualized in different sources in this period. I'm going a little beyond the court chronicles and Mirzanama text for this presentation, and I'm bringing in different craft-based manuals that has been produced in the period, and to show that how perfumes and illuminants were rooted as a craft knowledge and a scientific knowledge in this period. Locating vision and sight. Vision or sight has been attested with critical sensory bearing in Abul Fazl exposition on illumination. The association between light and divine kingship remains well organized for the Mughal Empire. At the same time, the Mughal chronicles skillfully locates it in the realm of sight. It was one of divine implications as well of utility and subsistence. He acknowledges flame Shula as sacred and the light of God. He simultaneously considers sun and fire as sources of light and to be of sublime element, basis of life and continued existence of humankind, and essential facilitators of basic nourishment such as food and medicine, Giza and Dava. The love of light for the world illuminating, enlightened emperor is in the praise of the deity, and to truly appreciate the veneration of fire for his exalted qualities requires wisdom and profoundness. Mughal chronicles also is remarkable for foregrounding the significance of the eye and the role of eyesight, Chashme-e-Bina, in aiding light for its material and spiritual function. Similarly, the Mughal Chronicles also furnishes with a rich account of Mughal illuminants, especially Abul Fazl Zaini Akbari, in furthering light's ubiquitous essence both in its natural and man-made forms. Luminous stones such as Surat Kran, Chandrakant, fire pots, Shamdan, fanush and torches serving various household and courtly activities both in the indoor and the outdoor setting. This were done with the profusion of the material profusion of the illuminants were done to intensify visibility, to facilitate long distance light and vision, especially for those for the peripatetic, for the people on the move, for the camps on the move, and also kind of to enable long distance light and vision and travel and ensure a well-being and safety of the people and the polity. At the same, while we talk of the illuminants, the lower rung of the sensory hierarchy, smell, even though there has been accorded with a lower status in the hierarchy of human sensorium, Abul Fazl offers a different sensory impression. Smell, and especially pleasant fragrance, Bouye Khush, was highly valorized by the Mughal Emperor Akbar and also the subsequent emperors, and considered as a form of divine worship. The imperial association of perfume with religion and its accordance as a secret object enhanced the royal significance of the Mughal perfumery workshop, even the Khushbu Khana. Before going into the Mughal corpus of text, the Mughal chronicle, I want to focus right now on late 13th century, 14th century perfume manual called Nuzutul Kulub. It was composed during the one of the Khalji emperor's court and written by Syed Hussain Mahmud, and it positions perfume as a very interestingly sensory object. And I want to go through, kind of travel through the recipes and the methods of perfume making. As the text positions, admirable quality sifat and the preparatory methods of simple and compound perfumes are elaborated in detail in 17 chapters and sections. Aromatics such as musk, camphor, saffron, frankincense, agarwood, and sandalwood are used recurrently as key ingredients for various perfumes. Compound perfumes require floral substances such as rose, fragrant rose, essence of roke, arakegul, keora, chrysanthemum, jasmine, blue lotus, or water lily, and others. For perfume 1, good quality of aloe wood and fragrant sandalwood had to be mixed, soaked in rose water for 3 nights and then dried. After that, half a dirham of ambergris, half a dirham of pure musk, and a small amount of young good quality camphor had to be dissolved in the rosewater solution. The essence had to be stirred well until it became a single perfume, after which thin and clean keora flowers and jasmines were mixed and put on the top of the glass in which the perfume was stored. This kept the perfume fragrant, and when it was sprayed in a gathering or in a special assembly, the whole setting became fragrant. Simultaneously, if this perfume was rubbed on the face and the limbs, it stimulated the temperament and senses and intensified the soul. There are a list of several perfumes which are intended, the intention is to stimulate the temperament, increase joy, and bring positive benefit on the body. Moving on to the categorization of Mughal perfumes. The Mughal perfumes were in the form of incenses, gulkam and bukhur, As Professor Alam was suggesting towards the soap, I've come across several references of Mughal soaps prepared and consumed in the form of scented soaps, uptane, that to be rubbed on on the body, abirmaya and ghasul, a liquid soap, also Iraqi soap that has been kind of referred, the recipe has been replicated in this period. Argaja and Santuk, and this terms also has kind of interesting um, reference of the sensory quality and the impact of it on the body. Sanskrit for satisfaction were two significant Mughal perfumes meant for the summer months and used to keep the skin fresh and cool. Ruh Afza, which means increasing the spirits or prolonging life, and Kishtar Ghashta, it means intending towards rubbing, were the ones with very fine smells meant to be burnt in censers to keep in the households and the palace setting clean, fragrant. Parijat or Parijat and Chua were distilled form of liquid perfumes kept in bottle and applied either directly on bodies or on clothes. Focusing on Bayaz. Bayaz is a 17th century household manual, which is a detailed account of different craft recipes and technological knowledge, and also detailing of ingredients and specification of quantities. It replicates a lot of ingredients and perfumes from the Akbarnama, but at the same time, it also provides different kind of new perfumes, recipes. I want to specifically focus on the perfume Gandharaj. It's a stylized Mughal perfume, meaning the king of all fragrances. Each of the ingredients, as listed, was mixed with honey, oil, secretion of civet cat, Rogan sanur, and cardamom oil, and roasted. Then the mixture was put in a glass vessel called kupi, the mouth of which was enclosed with cotton. Another vessel of cooking pot, Avant, was taken, whose bottom surface was perforated with a hole. The orifice of the inverted glass kupi was inserted in it, and it was placed on a tripod boiler. Another earthen vessel mixed with porcelain and was placed below for collection. After this, a glass firepot was used to facilitate the process. Cow dung was added to it to slow down the fire in a manner that the above mentioned concoction would trickle down in the earthen porcelain bowl. The Gandharaj perfume was thus produced and rewashed with the initial composition, thus collecting the final perfume. The process of preparing Gandharaj involved extra ingredients such as frankincenses and zedavari. There were also different kinds of new perfumes which were made from the animal fat or charbi. According to the method narrated in the text, the fat of ram, charbi guspand, and fat of ship's tail, dumba, was boiled and filtered. It was cleared or washed 15 times so that the foul odor of the animal extracts went away. Then it was washed with rose water 4 to 5 times. When it was cleaned, it was boiled so that the water mixed well with the fat. A mixture was formed along with water and removed from heating. It was left to cool down, as a result of which the fat came up and the water settled at the bottom. This fat was collected and the water was discarded. After this, the fat had to be reset at the fireplace and heated. After heating for some time, the fat was left to cool down. As soon as it cooled down, the perfume was collected. The aromatic residue formed the upper thick layer that had to be mixed with water. After the collection, the perfume was made into globules and used as a hand wash. The entire method was emulative of the recipe for preparing Iraqi soap, sabun Iraqi, and required skillful execution with extreme precision. Mughal perfumes were deemed of high religious value and of aesthetic significance and for courtly consumption in the Indo-Islamic traditions. It endowed with transactional symbolism and political importance, as well as significance for corporeal consumption and external bodily application for personal and social intimacy. A lot of it, our conversation has been in the last 2 days has been around water, and water plays a very significant role in the making of the perfume, from the starting point of distillers, pressers, the Teli community to the perfumers Gandhi, and water in the form of hot, cold, in different forms of arsenic water that is becoming very important for illuminants that I'm going to focus on right now, is becoming very central in the making and the craft production of the sensory objects that is intending towards the health of the people and the polity. Focusing now on the illuminants, There were different, that's like besides the luminance stones, there were a plethora of colored Mughal candles that were produced in this period. Besides the colored Mughal candles, there were also like I'm focusing on, this is my ongoing work, and I'm putting it out for a review, a journal review, and this is a portfolio of Mughal fireworks that kind of come up from the Bayaz. So the Mughal aesthetics also combine the light and color together to create a multi-pronged visual effect, temporalizing the surrounding through the material practices, light dispersed over short and long distances, and the use of colors to accentuate the polychromatic effect was a very well-mediated sensory execution to engage the surrounding with the viewer. Arguably, the visual prompts and the functions aimed at stimulating the senses for integrating a diversified audience into a shared experience of pleasurable way of seeing and even to facilitate intimacy. It also warmed, activating a sense of tactility perceived through heat and temperature felt on the skin. Crafting a multisensorial engagement, it integrated space and time of the local in which it was either consumed or the landscape through which it moved. Material sensoriality of artificial lights find a heightened expression when the Illuminants are studied in cognizance with the role of fireworks that aimed at creating a visual spectacle, a celebratory vista, and a magnificent display of polychromes and motley of radiance. These fireworks, even though these are chemical compositions with very beautiful names, suggest a visual experience that were embedded in the delightful natural phenomena and pleasurable effects pertaining to sight. The production of the fireworks had to be customized in a way that the resultant alloys resemble either the brightness of the moonlight or the splendor of the azure moon or the blazing sunshine, or to create a motion-based effect, for example, dangling or spinning or revolving like an orbit, or diving or sharp lighting, shooting or scattering. Besides the visual act of watching or seeing a spectacle in the sky as part of a collective pursuit, it was a collectively aesthetic and appealing to the sensory faculties. The use of colors is a conscious choice and in moderation. For example, fireworks of 2 colors, 7 colors, white colors, one resembling a colored garment, one scattering gold, is again to create an in motion polychromatic or multi luminous effect on the viewer. Another very interesting striking aspect of this fireworks is the telling of the ingredients. Basically, then like all the ingredients are made of saltpeter, charcoal, arsenic. At the same time, there are a lot of coloring ingredients which has its own smelling properties. It's significant to highlight on the visual effects created and consumed by this fireworks. Sound or auditory sensory experience is almost understated in the combusting and the cracking of these fireworks to a point. A Mughal fireworks has been named in accordance to the sound it creates. The preparation procedure specifies that even though there were sufficient peepers, loud sound would still be produced. The usage of peepers around the physical body of the fireworks alloys had to control and moderate the loud and rattling sound of the fireworks. What is equally deemed necessary to underline is the presence of persistence of pungent smell when these fireworks are burned or cracked. The main and the recurrent ingredients are saltpeter, sulfur, charcoal, arsenic, ink in varying degrees and the amount, and with occasional usage of coloring agents. Each of these ingredients has signatory olfactory identities from the metallic to pungent to acidic to burnt smell of coal. When combusted collectively as an alloy, it presumably dispersed a cumulative smell that was distinctive of the fireworks consumed. The need to heighten the visual effects can be considered as a way to cancel the noise and smell to maintain a sensory harmony of the fireworks consumption in the Mughal context. While we talk about the positive sensory aspects of this of the illuminants and perfumes, also kind of mingled together. They reacted together for the basis of the liquid basis of the two ingredients, oil, the flame, and as well as the perfumes, which are based on different reactive agents, chemical agents, and natural ingredients, and especially oil and water. Both of the illuminants and both illuminants and perfumes also created a lot of sensory precarity and apprehensions. It caused accidents from oil lamps. They were one of the most Most noted one is the burning of Jahanara, Mughal princess Jahanara, from a brushing of a perfume cloth on the oil lamp. There were loss of human lives and damage of material property, use of fire for burning down of houses and villages, employment of perfumes for political intrigue, use of fireworks like military tactics against enemies and war animals in the battlefields. Also, the continued practice of Hindu widow burning or sati, the anointment of scented oil on the women's body. At the same time, the use of light and perfumes in death ceremonies and illumination in graveyards as a kind of a juxtaposition, as a kind of a contrary juxtaposition of something beautiful to kind of create a consumption of collective consumption in the times of mourning. I'm not reading this out. I'm highlighting the fire accident of Jahanara here, and there are several more that I've come across. The recovery from Jahanara's burn accident is a very interesting aspect to understand emotions, where it kind of created a grief and a sense of mourning in the entire empire. And Shah Jahan himself renounced attending the audience, and he almost withdrew himself from any public appearances. And when he recovered, it was marked with a massive charity and also distribution of charitable things. Grief, from the accident, grief is becoming a very lament, and grief is a very significant aspect from this accident. Also, the physical pain and the recovery and the healing of the process of burn and from burning, physical burns. At the same time, perfumes has been used several times for political intrigue and plotting deceit in the Mughal Empire. This is another example of a political bid for succession for the throne, where Aurangzeb uses perfumes to kind of sedate Murad Baksh and take away all his equipments. A very interesting thing, this is something I'm currently looking at. I'm looking at problems, deficiency in ear and eye and nose, the two main organs for sight and olfaction. And I came across this wonderful, very interesting example of a condition called sudut, in Mizan al-Tib text by Muhammad Akbar Arzani. I think Professor Tandon was already talking about the tip texts in this period, and this is by Muhammad Akbar Arzani, a different text than what she was talking about. And this is in the third section, there's a section on ilaj, and this one is on the treatment of a condition called sudut, which is a condition causing obstruction in the nose and the weakness in the eyesight or blindness. This is especially when a person gets up and turns around, his eyes gets blurry. It can be a problem of the stomach, for example, a worm in the stomach membrane. In any case, the nose has to be strengthened. Food suitable for the humor and the small intestine had to be consumed. Pearls crushed, braid, silai karde with lemon juice, sandalwood and pomegranate juice is useful. If the cause was the movement of the head, hot ointments had to be applied and the spicy food had to be eaten. This is also another focus is on the labor, where I'm trying to understand the water work that all the laborers associated with the perfume making and the illuminants making were concerned. So Gandhi, the perfumer, and also Mashalchis and lamp-bearers and Atish Shahs, the three communities that I'm talking about, they were all working with oil, water, and the different illuminants and the aromatics that I was talking about. Towards the end, the concluding reflections, as I kind of wrap up, embodied practices of sensory objects such as perfumes and illuminants was a braided multisensorial engagement of the sight, oral, haptic, and the olfactory. They were not in isolation, is what I want to suggest. Illuminants rooted in the Mughal ideals of divine kingship enhanced the experience of sight by increasing visibility, penetrability, and access through lights, ensured spatial stability for static spaces as well as mobility in long-distance travel through the dark and the uncharted landscape. It served for the well-being. Mughal perfumes bodily application, either externally or infused, sprinkled, inhaled, or consumed orally, had transformative effects on the body humor, balanced temperaments, and elevated spirits. Illuminants fragrance and aromatic shed ephemeral properties had transformative effects, integrated people in social settings, offered a site of participative codependence between objects and bodies in the Mughal polity. They also reacted to create sensory apprehensions emerging out of accidents of fire breakouts, property losses, physical injuries, body burns, and unexpected deaths caused due to these material practices in certain settings. The subsequent process of grief, mourning, recovery, and healing informed the embodied material practices through the emotive implications of this artifact's association with bodily sensorium. Water walk, and towards the final reflection, water work or water dependency emerges as a major fulcrum in the material preparation and consumption of the sensory objects. From the starting point of cleaning, washing, distilling with warm cold water, scented water or arsenic water, to the extinguishing of fire with water, the entire sensory economy stands on the availability and the purification of the water in the polity. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Amrita. We still have 20 minutes for discussion. So, mm,
Let's not take the questions online.
okay. So there are certain questions in the chat box. While they are reading it, we can take up the questions from the audience here also. So Amol, please.
Or maybe they can just speak the question they're raising their hand.
Okay.
The first one.
The first one is Neha Varmani. Okay, Neha, please ask your question.
Hi, thank you everyone for such a great panel. I have two questions, one for Prasun and one for, actually two for Amrita. Prasun, if I got it right, you were talking about the latter half of the 17th century as the period when there was this phrase you use, scope for learning. But I was wondering then, how do we think about texts like Garcia de Horta's 16th century work on simples and compounds? Because he produced this extensive volume, which was also in circulation in Europe. And in that work, he also makes these comparisons between how he's learning firsthand from Indian practitioners, and the knowledge which was circulating before him in Europe was not right because these people were far removed from Indian practitioners. So if you have a comment on why we should just look at the latter half of 17th century as the period for scope of learning. And for Amrita, it's a two-part question. You mentioned European scholarship on hierarchy of senses, but there does exist a very extensive literature Islam on how senses were organized, thought of within the Islamic discourse, especially the difference between internal and external senses, and this idea that sensory faculty can be put in a hierarchy, but not a sensory experience. So if you could just think through that. And second part is, you spoke about fireworks and the kind of smoke they would produce, which contradicts the first part of the presentation where we are talking about how good smell is important for health. So does just the sight and colors distract you from smelling the air that's around you? So I found that to be a little contradictory. So if you could just like expand on that a little.
So I believe we will collect 2-3 questions and then you can answer, Prasun and other speakers. So Amol, please.
Just one question each to Prasun and to Amrita. Beginning with Prasun, I was just a little bit intrigued by your paper. So I was just wondering, in the period that you have talked about, 17th century, the big late 17th and all, I was just wondering about the concept of royal touch that was there in Europe, and especially under the English king, under the English monarch Charles II, and which the time period is more or less the same when Manucci is here in India, and it may be assumed that he knew about the practice back home, back in England, Europe. So I was just wondering that and you also mentioned about Pepe. Pepe himself has actually written a detailed account of the practice of royal touch in the court of Charles II. So I was just wondering whether in the records of the sailors, or if there are any records, or in the records of Manucci, you find this concept of royal touch, even if it's indirectly, because scrofula, that was the main thing for royal touch, was also very prevalent among the sailors who used to travel to different parts. So I was just wondering whether you find any reference to that. And to Amrita, there was this question I'm just curious to ask that we have been talking about the perfumes and about the senses and all in the Mughal court in the context of general kind of usage and also to some extent gender based on women and all. But I was just wondering whether the perfumes or the use of perfumes in the royal court extended to the eunuchs, or if you could just enlighten on that, because eunuchs were an important part of the harem or of the zenana part. So if you could just highlight that, whether they were sharing any kind of perfumes or anything, perfumes or anything kind of thing with the royal, so-called royal queen, royalty, and or anything like that. Thank you.
Any more questions online? I think I saw Giovanna's hand raised and Natalie's now.
Natalie, you may ask your question.
My question's for Rose. Rose, I was just wondering, and you may not have done this work already, or you may have talked about it in other contexts, but I was wondering, do you know anything about where some of these women actually learnt to do what they did?
Okay, thanks. So are there more questions online?
Are there more questions? No.
No, you would have seen that happen.
Right. I have a question for both Amrita and Rose. I was actually wondering as to how would you look at sensory experience as a cognitive category? I mean, is it purely an embodied category, or in the process of becoming an embodied category, it's also a constructed category? And if it's a constructed category, do we not need to look at the relationship of the sensorial economy with the culture of textuality, and the extent to which texts help construct senses, or vice versa?
Okay, so Professor Deepak Kumar, and then we will take up the responses, and if time permits, we will go to the next.
Thank you very much. Well, Dr. Rose and Dr. Chattopadhyay, we enjoyed your both presentations. Tell me whether these examples could figure in the materia medica of that time. In Italy, you have Padua, where medical education was very, very strong. In fact, the dissection took place, etc. So, have you found any instance of what you have talked about is reflected in the materia medica of the time? Second thing is that these were probably limited to a microscopic minority, the royalty, the nobles, etc. But would it percolate down to the within court lower classes? Maybe in religious practices. In temples, you find use of camphor and many other things. In ordinary household also, you have. So are they reflected in the sources that you have touched? Now, about the question of sight, which Dr. Chattopadhyay has very well mentioned, I wish you could elaborate upon it. Sight was limited to, it was a very limited understanding. Chashma is referred, but where was the chashma? Yeah. Nazar is referred. But, there is a difference between what you see and the sight. The Sanskrit term is drishti. So this also needs, in the absence of glasses, surma alone was not enough. Thank you.
Okay, so may I request Prasun to please respond, and while you respond to the other questions, I was just curious because Amrita talked about this famous incident of Jahan Ara being burnt in mid 17th century. So, although historians have established that it's a mythical thing that how Gabriel Boughton helped and then he got concessions for East India Company. So, did you find any reference regarding Gabriel Boughton in 17th century travel writings?
To begin with, Saurabh, your query. I found obviously descriptions in Manucci in Bernier about Jahanara's burning, but not the other that you're talking about. So, as far as I can remember offhand about this, Neha, your question very important, and I would like to delineate what I was trying to do over here. So, the scope of learning is always there, but I see a change in the way of learning in the second half of the 17th century. And I am focusing mostly on the dynamics of the 17th century itself. So, and on travelers who are of a range from sailors to physicians to sort of itinerants like Manucci. So Garcia de Orta of earlier times and all the body of knowledge which Ines Zupanov or Angela Barreto Javier talk about in that book Catholic Orientalism and some of the other works, very important, and that remains. So that's a different subset altogether. But if we focus on the travelers of the 17th century, that's where I was delineating, and I was just trying to look at the shifts of and it is also not to say that in the earlier era the interest in learning is not there. So with the sailors arriving at that time in ships, especially the English factory records and other diaries, Purchas, Hakluyt Society, all of that shows that the ability to cope with that kind of increased over time, and it also led to more assured tones towards the second half. So when I talked about Manucci towards the end of the 17th century, it was more about um, more assured tones on the one hand, and a contradictory the contradictory space always remains where people are trying to learn. So it's not unilinear. No movement that we see in historical scape is unilinear. So there are contradictory elements. I was indicating towards that. So does that kind of respond to your query, if I may ask?
Yeah, thank you.
Amol, your query about the royal touch, I would and about what's happening in England and what is Manucci's awareness of this. I would be a little apprehensive about using that as a model here, because questions of fealty come in. Earlier feudal norms which kind of percolate into what the monarch does, uh, to a very different European context. Yes, sailors were using that healing touch, but when I talked about what Manucci sort of claims here, it is more of someone who's been in the subcontinent for almost 35, 40 years, and is more, in many ways, more of this context, with being an observer of certain Christian sort of antagonisms between Capuchins and Jesuits, all that is going on. But he keeps himself distant from that. He observes it. so does not take sides. So that's why I would be a little, and then also the concept of the white and the indigenous, that sense of race, it does not always apply to these characters who who are traveling around in the subcontinent, and so there are, I would have reservations about that. Yeah.
Rose, may I request you to respond some of the questions which were raised? And while doing that, I was wondering that before this germ theory got firmly grounded in European medical notions, this idea of miasma or spreading of disease through foul air was very much there in pre-modern European medical notions. So, do you believe that, or I would like to know your opinion that this entire emphasis on perfume as prophylactic medicine has something to do with that idea also, that to ward off the foul air, because that was the source of spreading of disease also. So, may I request you to please answer the queries? Rose.
I might have to ask people to repeat the questions because there have been so many interspersed with things that were not for me. But in response to the question about foul air, firstly, miasma is a term that's coined in the 19th century. And I think it's done as a response to their newly developed ideas about germ theory. It's not something you find regularly in 16th century texts. The relationship between bad air, mal aria, and health, according to my research, is actually more to do with the stench is the indicator of the poor quality of the air. So they're worried about humidity of the air. Humidity is the mother of putrefaction, and you can tell when something's putrefied because it's an excess of unnatural heat, according to the ancient Greek theorization of it. And the stench is the indicator that something has already putrefied, so it is no longer healthy. So the smell works as I describe it as a barometer for the quality of the air. It's not the smell itself that's the problem, it's what it indicates. So in the same way that you can tell when it's cold and damp, there's a certain musty smell to the air, you can also smell when it's hot and damp, and that's very dangerous because it means things are rotting. So it goes back to ancient Greek theories of putrefaction, I suppose. What was the other question? You had two halves of that. Yeah, so it relates, the perfume is used to balance the properties of the air. Doesn't necessarily mean that the air smells bad. For example, so going back to basic humoral theory, you've got hot, cold, wet, and dry. They all relate to the seasons. They relate to different times of year, obviously. They relate to different astrological elements, and they relate to different times of life, different periods of life. If you are in the correct season, hot, damp air, which is a spring thing, isn't as problematic. If you are in summer and the air is hot and damp when it should be hot and dry, that's a problem, because it's the unseasonable nature of these changes. Like, we all know that it gets cold and damp in the winter, hotter in the summer. So the reason that they're using rose vinegar in summer is to dry the air out and cool it down, because the problem is that it's become too hot and too damp. So it's not, these are not binary things, these are all relative. And normally when you're talking about, I try not to discuss plague because it really pollutes the rationale that sits behind it. When they're using these things, if you're smelling rose vinegar, what you're doing is you're trying to rectify the air as it enters the body so it doesn't disrupt your internal balance. So that's how smell relates specifically to plague. My argument focuses more, my interest focuses more on year-round use of perfume. So Florence is particularly humid. In the winter, it gets very cold, and it lasts for a long time. So the problem, if you think about the humoral definition of sicknesses, an excess of phlegm is caused by an overly cold, damp environment. So you would want to try and prevent things which we would now recognize as recurring coughs and colds and seasonal flus, etc. And you try and prevent that by modifying the environment that you're permanently within. So that's that. Does that answer your question? And then I'll try and remember what the other ones were.
Sure, sure.
In terms of Deepak's question, in terms of Padova, sure, Padova is one of the seats of knowledge, but in Florence, they're also conducting the dissections, and it's a major, major school is actually in Pisa, which is part of the Florentine Grand Duchy's domain. Cosimo I actually sets up, reinstitutes the university in Pisa, so Scuola Normale Superiore, the studio it's called in the 16th century. Florence doesn't have a university because he puts all the education in Pisa for various reasons. And yes, all of these things are grounded in the botanical knowledge at the time. So I can turn to a material. I do use materia medica to back this up, to formulate it. This is practiced medicine of the time. And I'm sorry, I don't remember the other half of your question.
Yeah. So now I would request Amrita to please respond to some of the queries or questions which were raised. Also, while answering, in fact, you just probably because of lack of time, you just skipped through this laborers who were involved in perfume making or other these illuminants and all. I would like you to throw some light on that whether in Persian sources you get to know about the condition of these laborers and all, because I remember one very recent book by Amanda Lanzillo on pious labor, where she talks about how the laborers who were informed in perfume making, they always thought it as something divinely ordained, and they believe that by doing that they are being true Muslims, or they are following the paths of Islam also. So this connection between labor and religious vocation. So do you find anything something like that in Mughal period or in the period which you are talking about? Amrita, please.
Thank you so much for the questions. I'll try to answer most of them. I'll start with Neha's question first. I'm aware of the Islamic hierarchy. Also, there's some work happening, especially the Brill series on Islamic senses by Christian Lang. It kind of lays out the hierarchy in the Islamic world and the philosophy within within Islam about sensory hierarchies. I've not looked into primary sources, to be honest, but I'm drawing upon the secondary to bring the European method with the method that has being worked on right now. But it's a very, I'm conscious of the method. I'll definitely try to expand it a little bit more. About the contradiction of the good smell and the fireworks smells, which is pungent. I didn't mean it to be a contradiction in that sense, but I also want, my point was it's the multisensorial engagement, whereas the Buyekushi has been endorsed as a sensory attribute with a lot of admirable qualities. The bad smell hasn't been attributed with that kind of endorsement, but at the same time, when I want to kind of look at illuminance in perfumes, I see it as a wholesome sensory experience where the bad smell is also coming along with the good sight. I don't mean it to be a contradiction, but in conversation with one another, even though they are in contradiction. Second point would be about the eunuchs. I have come across a lot of references of usage of perfumes by eunuchs, especially the naming of the eunuchs. The Mughal eunuchs, they were named as Badami, Kafuri, Sandali. It was named after aromatics, and Emakal's work is hinting towards the fact that their consumption was also named after aromatics, was also associated with maybe the colors of the aromatics, or even the consumption of aromatics, or maybe to to kind of diminish the smell after castration of the eunuchs by using of sandali as a kind of a cooling agent, as a calming agent after the castration. And also eunuchs possessing perfumes is consuming perfumes is Zafar Khan's account is a very interesting case where eunuchs are possessing perfumes and consuming perfumes as well. But it's a very important thing to think through when I'm thinking through gendered consumption, and I will also try to incorporate it in my. I don't usually, because there has been already literature around it. But if I'm thinking through gender, I will definitely bring it into the conversation too. Three. The sensory experience is a cognitive category. Yes, definitely. This is actually my larger argument where I see senses has been textualized. The craft around senses has been textualized, and how the materiality of text is in conversation with the materiality of sensory economy. This is one aspect of it. The recording, the written records of around the sensory production is one of the main focus of my work. Besides that, I think also I focus on another text called like one of is Majmua Sanai, where there are so many copies of the text as well. So in that case, the multiple copies are also hinting at the replication and the spreading, the dispersion of the knowledge at the same time. And besides that, I also think the use of Mizaj, Dimag, and Dil are also kind of creating, referring to Margaret Pernod's work on emotions, like these are all kind of connected to the brain and the cognitive senses as well, the senses. So yes, definitely sensory experience is a cognitive category. I agree to that, and I am drawing upon that as well. Professor Kumar's point question on
Okay.
like
Sorry, Amrita, for interrupting, but we are running short of time. Probably we will take up the questions later on. So during the round table, we will discuss on these things. Okay.
all
So
right.
we end this session and break for tea, and then 12:15 we will reassemble. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.